It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Wittnauer, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Larry Lasser from the CBS television news staff, and Francis W. Carpenter of the Associated Press. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Thanat Khoman, Minister Plenipotentiary of Thailand and its acting permanent representative to the United Nations.
There'll be no news to anyone that the crisis in Indochina is getting warmer. But Secretary of State John Foster Dulles has said that one of the musts before there can be united action in Southeast Asia is moral sanctions by the United Nations. Well, little Thailand has asked the United Nations to send a peace patrol there to warn against possible invasion of their country. Mr. Khoman, this is the first time that any move has been made in the United Nations regarding the Indo-Chinese war. Now, could you tell us first just why you think your country is in danger?
Well, I would be very glad to explain. As you may know, the fightings have been going on for several years in Indochina, but up to very recent time, that is to say up to 1953, did we begin to feel that the danger was very close to us and may affect us. When I said in April 1953, it's because the Viet Minh at that time came very close to our border. And in December 1953, they took a town in Indochina, in Laos more exactly, which is exactly across the border of Thailand. And as you may know, the Viet Minh forces are very strong. They number in 3 or 4 divisions supported by other units, and they have very new equipments supplied from outside. When the Viet Minh came as close as to our border, of course we began to feel that they may not stop there and may want to make incursions into our territory. And that is the reason why my government thought a few months ago of bringing this question before the United Nations.
In other words, there's no question of there being a civil war within your country, but it actually is the danger of a foreign invasion.
Exactly, Mr. Lester.
Well, Mr. Khoman, isn't there a danger of infiltration among all the people coming across the border from Laos and Cambodia? What about the communist menace inside Thailand?
The danger of infiltration certainly exists because we have in Thailand about 60,000 refugees who came from Vietnam, from Indochina. And of course, the refugees were accepted by my government on humanitarian ground. But we must not forget that they belong to the same race as the Viet Minh, and there may be occasions or there may be people who may feel inclined to be subjected to the propaganda of the Viet Minh.
Well, you've received support in the United Nations so far from United States, Turkey, and nationalist China and other countries. Are you satisfied at this date with the support you've received in your appeal for help?
We are very much gratified and grateful for all the support that we have received, especially from the government and the officials and the people of the United States. Mm-hmm. And also we have received support from some other countries. This morning, the representatives of New Zealand, Turkey, Brazil, China, the United Kingdom, and the United States, of course, have spoken in our favor.
Mr. Khoman, I have an indelible memory of seeing your Thai troops in action alongside the United States troops in Korea during one of the coldest winters there. But can you tell us something about the Thai army itself? Could it defend Thailand at all? Is it large enough?
We don't have a very strong force because our economy would not allow us to support a very strong military force. But I think we have a good size force, and in Korea our troops have behaved themselves very well. From what I learned from your generals, especially General Van Fleet, he told me personally that he was very satisfied with our troops who combated extremely well.
Are your troops still in Korea?
They
Mr.
are
Khoman?
still there, Mr. Lusser. Yes.
Well, I think the average American has a high admiration for what your troops did in Korea, and the fact that Thailand was the first to come to our assistance in Korea. What support do you get from the average American? Have you heard anything from anybody inside the United States in this Indo-Chinese case?
Well, up till now, we have received a general support, especially from the press. I think the press represents the public opinion of the country, and the fact that the press is in our favor, has supported us, this shows that the public in this country is in our favor. Of course, we receive a number of letters from individuals who also give us the sympathetic support.
Mr. Khoman, there's a great deal of talk in this country that you may have heard of that we must draw a line somewhere in Asia over which communist imperialism must not pass. Now, do you think that Thailand itself has been given the title of the line over which communist imperialism must not go?
I would like to think of a line, and if there should be a line, that line should be exactly on the border of the communist state and not on the border of some other state. That is our feeling, because we have seen in the past in Europe during the last war how great the danger was to try to draw up a line. I think if there should be a line, it should be exactly at the border of the communist state and not anywhere else.
Well, incidentally, sir, I know that you have been infiltrated from Laos and Cambodia, which are right really on the front line now of the Indo-Chinese war, but one does hear a great deal of talk to the intent that it's too late to save Laos and Cambodia. Do you feel that way?
I don't feel that way at all, and I must say that to say that something is late, I believe is a pretext that we give for not doing a thing or for not wanting to do a thing that we should do, or that our obligation, whether moral or physical or intellectual, imposes on us. So we wouldn't think that it is too late to do anything.
Well, in connection with it being too late, also there is sometimes the charge that some people don't have the will to fight. What about the will of the Thai people to fight?
Mr. Carpenter, I would like to say only that my country has been independent all along. We have never been subjected to foreign domination, and I can assure you that no one in Thailand would like to lose this freedom and independence. The fact that our troops in Korea have fought as well as any other troops of the allied countries which sent their troops in Korea show that our troops can do a good job in defending our country, provided that they have the means and the support from all our friends and allies.
Mr. Khoman, our Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, said that one of the musts before there could be united action in Southeast Asia, and of course he was referring especially to the United States, was that we must not be fighting for colonialism. Now, your little kingdom is certainly a free country. It's never been invaded so far as I know. Now, do you feel that the action of Thailand in asking for this peace patrol to be sent there is a symbol of the movement of the free countries of Asia against the new imperialism from the communist states?
Well, Mr. Lusser, to come back to the fact that my country has been independent and free all along is a guarantee that we would never accept colonialism or imperialism, whether in the new or in the old form. And the fact that my country has preserved its independence, I think, should also be a guarantee that we would never like to be subjected to foreign domination. And the fact that we bring our case before the United Nations is a guarantee that we intend to take every steps, every measure to preserve our freedom and independence, and also to help keep peace and security in the region, and to help keep freedom and independence for all our neighbors.
Mr. Khoman, there has been some talk that the communist-led forces in Indochina are receiving active military help and assistance from the Chinese communists. Do you know anything about that, sir? Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, we in Thailand, of course, have no direct information, but I'm sure that the people who are fighting against the communists in Indochina, I'm referring to French Indochina, must have direct information about that. And if I remember well, the command, the military command in Indochina has made announcements about supplies being sent from outside to the Viet Minh forces.
Well, Mr. Khoman, we're talking about your symbolizing the leadership of the free countries of Asia. Do you actually expect support from the other free countries of Asia, like Burma and India?
Well, I think there is a very good reason that the countries which are close to the danger are alive to the danger, and I'm quite sure that our neighbors, such as Burma, should be conscious and alive to the danger. And when the time comes, I'm sure that they will do everything that is in their command to take up the stand as we have taken.
Well, Mr. Khoman, may I ask you this question? I know that you received the support verbally of the United States in the United Nations. Do you expect the complete support of the United States in holding on to the independence of your country?
We are firmly convinced that the United States will lend us not only moral support, but material support and support in every other way. We have seen that in the United Nations, the United States representative, Ambassador Lodge, has made a very strong speech in our favor, and we can remember also that the Secretary of State, Mr. Dulles, has also made a similar speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khoman. Glad to have you here tonight.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Francis W. Carpenter. Our distinguished guest was Thanat Khoman, Minister Plenipotentiary of Thailand and its acting permanent representative to the United Nations. The worldwide reputation of Longines watches was not made in a day nor in a decade. It's been building for close to a century. Yes, since 1866, Longines has continually made watches of the highest character only, and has acquired along the way the highest skills and the highest honors ever achieved by any watchmaker. 10 World's Fair Grand Prizes, 28 gold medals, highest honors for accuracy in observatory competitions, and a position of leadership in sports, aviation, and in science. Now, in these magnificent Longines watches of today, discriminating men and women may find all the qualities which they seek in a fine watch: perfect timekeeping, superb appearance, unique prestige, and reputation. And may I suggest that if you wish to buy for yourself or as an important gift just about the finest watch made anywhere in the world, your choice might well be Longines, the world's most honored watch. And yet you may buy and own or proudly give a Longines watch for as little as $71.50. And if you pay the price of a Longines, insist on getting a Longines, the world's most honored watch, the world's most honored gift, premier product of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. This is Frank Knight reminding you that Longines and Whitnor watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Whitnor Watches. It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? They are CBS News correspondents Larry Lasser and Winston Burdett. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable Thomas H. Kuchel, United States Senator from California.
The fact that the Republicans are going to hold their presidential nominating convention in San Francisco next year certainly underscores what most of us suspected, that the state of California is beginning to outshine most of the East in political importance. Senator Kuchel, the state of California is not only important politically, but it's interesting politically. We ask you just where you stand in these recurrent arguments between your senior senator, Mr. Noland, and the president on questions like the defense of the offshore islands from China.
Yes, let me say this to you. First of all, I believe that the overwhelming vote which the Congress of the United States gave to the Formosa resolution indicates that the government and the people of the United States are completely in accord with the need for the islands of Formosa and the Pescadores to remain in the hands of Free China. I think that's conceded to be the position of every military leader in this country, from the President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General MacArthur, and others. I voted for that resolution. That resolution clothes the President with such authority as he may deem appropriate to see that that island chain remains free of communist aggression. Now, so far as the intervening islands are concerned, in my judgment, that constitutes a problem for the President under the Formosa resolution. In other words, whether or not the islands of Quemoy and Matsu should be protected by the military might of the United States is a question of tactics, of judgment, of decision by the President himself as to their importance with respect to the Formosa resolution. The responsibility is the President's. That's where, in my judgment, it should be. That's where the people of this country would want it to be. He is the only person in the government of our country who is capable and qualified on the basis of understanding all the facts to make that decision. And so I shall approve, both as a citizen and as a senator, the decision which he makes if he is required to make it.
In other words, without criticizing Senator Noland, do you back the President in his view?
Yes, sir. That is my position exactly.
Well, tell me, is there going to be a big fight in the San Francisco convention halls next year over the question of who is going to be vice president? There is a lot of jockeying for that position right now.
Well, let me say this to you. Of course, first of all, in your question and the way you phrase it, I'm sure you are assuming, as I do, that the President will be nominated again by the Republican National Convention. If that happens, as I believe it will, then I think it has been the traditional history of political conventions that the candidate for president pretty much indicates to the convention who he desires to have as his running mate. On that basis, it will then be the decision for President Eisenhower to make. Now, I would assume that the cordiality of the President and the Vice President, since they both came into office, the manner in which the President has delegated additional authority to Vice President Nixon, that the President probably would be minded to indicate the same choice in the next convention that he did in the last.
Well, Senator, why have the Republicans chosen San Francisco as the site for the convention next year?
Well, of course, I would like to say, first of all, as a good Californian, that I think it is recognition on the part of a great national political organization of the growing importance, not alone of California, but of Western America. California will have the second largest delegation at the convention, or at any rate, it will have the same strength as Pennsylvania does. California's vote in the next presidential election will be important, and I believe that is part of the reason why the convention went there. Now, there's one more reason. as I see it. In my judgment, the people of California are pretty generally in favor of the way in which our federal government has been handled these last 2 years. I'm not going to say they agree with everything that's come along, and I'm certainly not going to say it's unanimous. But I believe I can tell you that the state of California is a pro-Eisenhower state. And I think that's another reason why the convention is being held there.
Senator Kuchel, you assume, nevertheless, that the vice presidential nominee is going to be a Californian, I take it.
Yes, I think that's a pretty good assumption.
Well, actually, to go back to the case of your senior senator, Senator Noland, he said not long ago that he wasn't in favor of drafting a reluctant man to be president of the United States. And apparently he was referring to Eisenhower. Now, do you feel that the Republicans can win without Eisenhower?
I think the Republican candidate for president 2 years from now can make a very strong case to the American people on the basis of how our government is being conducted today and how it has been conducted these last 2 years. But the question, I must add, I think is a little academic, because in my judgment, the American people want Dwight Eisenhower to continue as their leader, and I am sure, I don't know how you would define the word draft, but speaking for myself, I am sure that the Republicans of this nation will indicate very vigorously that they want Dwight Eisenhower to make the necessary sacrifice to continue for 4 more years shouldering what is a heavy burden on any man who inhabits the White House.
Well, Senator, from what you say, I gather that you believe that President Eisenhower will not be a reluctant candidate, but a willing candidate to run again.
I think this. Here is a man who has shouldered leadership for the last quarter of a century that has been tremendous. Military decisions that have been his have been the most onerous kind to bestow upon a man's shoulders. I don't know that we would begrudge the president a desire to live a few years in comparative peace, but he's a man that has run his life by duty and what duty requires of him, and I believe on that basis he would accede again to what he felt was his duty and a call to that duty by the people of this country.
Well, Senator Kuchel, there seems to be some doubt in the mind of the Senate Minority Leader, Senator Noland. Now, do you think that Senator Noland is a candidate then for president?
I don't think that Bill Noland is a candidate for president in the sense that he is opposing Dwight Eisenhower. And let me say this, because Bill Noland is my friend and Bill and I have worked together in the Senate, and I say that in spite of the fact that I've disagreed with him on a number of occasions. Bill Noland has helped in the Senate to write into law a great portion of the recommendations of the president. So on that basis, no, I do not want to say, because I do not believe that Senator Noland is a candidate for the presidency in the sense that he's opposing the President of the United States.
Senator Kuchel, the California sun may be outshining the East politically, but how about figuratively? What are you people doing out there about all this smog we hear about?
Well, that's a very good question. So far as air pollution is concerned, it has ceased to be a problem for the people of the city of Los Angeles alone. You here in New York a year or so ago ran into a day or so of what the local newspapers called smaze. And across this country, particularly in the populated areas, you have had considerable air pollution. That has been a subject attacked pretty much by local government. I've interested myself in it in Washington and have introduced legislation along with my colleague and the 2 senators from Pennsylvania to authorize the federal agencies, which the appropriate federal agencies, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, Commerce and Interior, to utilize their scientific research and tackle the problem of air pollution on a federal level to supplement the inquiry scientifically that is now going on by local government. And I want to tell you that just in the last 2 or 3 days, as a result of a meeting with members of the several agencies, I look forward to that legislation passing. The President observed the problem when he spoke to the Congress in his State of the Union message, so that there is a national aspect to this question of air pollution.
In other words, the climate of California isn't changing, but you're making all that smoke out there yourself. Well, thank you very much, Senator Kuchel of California.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry LeSueur and Winston Burdett. Our distinguished guest was the Honorable Thomas H. Kuchel, United States Senator from California. Longines has perfected, after 20 years of development, what is regarded as the most advanced automatic watch in the world. The exclusive self-winding mechanism is fabricated with a perfection which represents a new triumph for Longines craftsmanship. Here are facts that you should know. An automatic watch is wound by the movement of a pendulum or a rotor. Now, this diagram represents the winding rotor of many automatic watches. See how it moves only in half a circle. And this diagram represents the Longines automatic. It has a full swing, 360-degree winding rotor. Every movement of the wrist produces winding action. Design, however, is only the beginning of the Longines automatic. What makes the Longines watch so superlatively fine is the unsurpassed perfection of Longines manufacture, which has won for Longines 10 World's Fair grand prizes, 28 gold medals, more honors for accuracy than any other timepiece. Finest quality is your first consideration. Then, whatever your needs in a watch, whatever the style, whatever the purpose, Longines has made it for you. And every Longines watch will demonstrate in full measure the greater accuracy, complete reliability, which has made Longines the world's most honored watch, the world's most honored gift, premier product of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. This is Frank Knight, reminding you that Longines and Wittnauer watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Wittnauer Watches. At Longines Wittnauer Jewelers, see Atmos, the perpetual motion clock created by LeCoultre. Atmos runs without winding, without electricity, powered only by variations in the temperature of the atmosphere. Atmos, product of LeCoultre, division of Longines Wittnauer. It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Wittnauer, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Larry LeSueur from the CBS television news staff, and August Heckscher, chief editorial writer for the New York Herald Tribune. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Norman Thomas.
Well, our guest tonight may not have been the most successful man that ever ran for president of the United States, but surely he was one of the most persistent. He was a presidential candidate 6 times on the Socialist Party ticket, but now Mr. Thomas devotes his time to writing and talking and thinking about the problems of the post-war world. And Mr. Thomas, the world recently witnessed the victory of a socialist party in power in England directly after the war, but the Bevan government wasn't much of a success. Now, do you still feel that the socialization of big industries is the solution to social problems?
Well, first, I'm going to remind you that it was the Attlee and not the Bevan government, and that it was a very considerable success, that England and Europe are very much better off. You have no idea how many troubles would have happened if they hadn't. And if you'd had Churchill, I doubt if you'd had the settlement in Burma and India, and you might have had Indochina scattered all over the world.
Do you attribute that to the fact that it was a socialist government?
Yes, I do, because socialism, not perfectly, but socialism was more definitely in favor of independence than the conservatives were. I do not think, and never did, that the final road to heaven is state ownership. But I do think there are certain things that should be publicly owned, things like the natural resources and certain monopolies and oligopolies, but they should also be democratically managed. The British Labour government played out its score, and it was a good score, but there remain things to be done. You will remember, of course, that they got a bigger popular vote in the general election than the Conservatives, who won more seats in Parliament.
True, but what about world socialism, Mr. Thomas? Do you think that if democratic socialism were adopted the world over, that would be an answer to permanent peace?
Yes, in the same sense that I believe that if real Christianity were adopted, it would be an answer to permanent peace.
Norman, do you think that...
Hardly any other sense.
Well, do you think that the socialists in Europe might together form some kind of a third force?
They ought to, they might, especially if you could get any kind of integration in Western Europe. You've got to remember that democratic socialists, partly because they are democratic, have to win by programs of immediate appeal to the voters in the country, and nationalism cuts across of necessity. And it isn't disloyalty to socialist ideals, but practical politics that brings it about that Paul Henri Spaak, a good socialist, could declare rather pessimistically that the thing that socialists had learned best to nationalize was socialism.
What about the Marxian theory of the ever-increasing conflict between the classes? Do you American socialists hold with that?
No, and most socialists have really abandoned that, at least in its extreme and most rigid sense. Most democratic socialists would now tell you that they advance socialism as the necessary fulfillment of democracy, the application of democracy in the field of economics.
Norman, you said earlier that British Toryism had failed in the colonial problem in Asia. Do you think that the American democracy has succeeded or is succeeding any better?
No, chiefly by a kind of a combination of modesty and arrogance. Every now and then we're so modest that we won't speak up to the French on the subject of what should be done. And every now and then, perhaps unconsciously, we're so arrogant that we introduce, or seem to our friends to introduce, a new kind of isolationism, a sort of Uncle Sam knows best isolationism, which doesn't persuade them to go along. I think the substance of our intentions is pretty good. Our manners need to be improved.
Well, Norman, you were an articulate pacifist in World War I at least. Now, how would you feel about sending of troops to Indochina now to wage war or to stem communist aggression as a part of American democracy?
Terribly. Not because I am longer a religious pacifist in the sense that I once was. In some ways, I wish I were. I have, for a good long while, accepted the principle of collective security as a necessity in our modern world. I supported Truman's policy in Korea, as you probably know. I think that it would be the worst of all things, and many things are bad, were America to go it alone in Indochina, or to intervene alone, or without support of Asian opinion, or without a far better based native support than is now evident. I was horrified by the trial balloon Nixon flew. I thought that was dangerous. One of the most likely ways, I think, to get into World War III, and one of the worst, would have been that. And I am convinced that if we had gone it alone, such is Asian feeling, that the communists could have exploited, even in our hour of victory after a cruel and nasty war, hate and fear of suspicion of us and the rest of Asia, so that we would have been incredibly hurt.
How do you think we could win Asian support then, Norman?
Only by a far better practice of persuasion than we have followed. Only by a degree of patience, only by lifting up their hearts with hope. I have been twice, 2 successive years in Asia, and one of the things that worries me is our failure to make the average Asian believe that it is really we who care for peace. If only it's things that Truman and Eisenhower had said, for instance, have said about universal disarmament under proper controls, could have been lifted to the level of a kind of an ideological crusade, always keeping up our strength, we would have been better off. We would have been better off if we'd used the United Nations a little more patiently in the matter of Indochina. We'd have been infinitely better off if we'd been clear-cut in opposition to colonialism and didn't seem to inherit the colonialism of the French and so on.
We couldn't, yes.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, but Norman, you then could see conditions under which you would be willing to support American participation in united action in Asia. It isn't the idea of ground troops there that horrifies you, it's the idea of ground troops in conditions that now exist.
Well, it horrifies me to think of the agony of it, but some things that horrify me may have to be accepted. And I think it's quite dangerous nonsense to talk about war without thinking of ground troops. That is, the notion that you can win by a couple of injudiciously distributed bombs is dangerous.
Well, how do you
nonsense.
feel about massive retaliation, Norman? Do you feel it's practical as a threat or practical as a military operation? Or
I suspect that if we come to the horror of Third World War, there'll be plenty of retaliation and massive retaliation. But I think the way that Mr. Dulles, whose good intentions also I admit, the way he used the phrase, his instant and massive retaliation, and I could bring mountains of evidence of this, had the effect of scaring lots of the American people and practically all our friends, and not much effect in scaring Zhou Enlai or Molotov or Malenkov. It was, in other words, neither practicable nor wise to speak as he spoke. He's been explaining it ever since.
I wonder whether, Larry, we could change the subject a little bit. Norman, you have been around and seen a great deal in the field of civil liberties over a long period of time. I just wonder how you do feel about the atmosphere that exists in this country today compared, let's say, to the atmosphere that existed after the First World War.
In some ways, the atmosphere immediately after the First World War, not only the atmosphere, but the actual things done were worse. After all, civil liberties reached their lowest ebb under that extraordinarily illiberal liberal Woodrow Wilson, with the ARC, the Beaufort Amendment, and the deportations, and the thousands of people arrested in what a historian has called Mitchell Palmer's obscene anti-red raids, and the Lusk laws. The campuses, college campuses, were far more closed and intolerant than they are today. The situation today is, heaven knows, very bad, and a comparison, especially in a couple of minutes, or you don't even allow that, I know, cannot be scientifically pressed.
Well, Norman, you got about 1 million votes in 1932. I think that was the largest number you ever amassed. Now, do you know anything what's happened to those people who did vote for you, who registered socialist, when they try to get jobs in civil service
I
government?
suppose that even in this country of happiness, where we all are living longer and longer and longer, a lot of them are dead. But of the living, and a good many before they were dead, they turned Democrat, at least for the nonce.
Was that past then held against them?
A lot of them got jobs under Roosevelt, and some of them have still got jobs, but they aren't socialists by acknowledgement anymore. I do not look at the past with unmixed satisfaction, but I do find myself slightly amused when the Republican president, so ably supported by the editorial writer of the Herald Tribune, really got around to sending messages. He sent a complete and comprehensive survey for a welfare state. Now, I don't quite like his version of the welfare state for reasons we won't go into, but there wasn't any basis for it in 32 in anybody's platform or anybody's speeches but mine. I accept the bows of the audience.
Well, Norm, I ask you this as a last question, since you just have about a minute. What do you think of the future of the Socialist Party here in America?
Well, I have said publicly and in the party that the present party hasn't much of a future. I still hope that it can be an educational agency, and I still hope that in some measure it can serve as a catalytic force to do what we need. That is to help to cure our instrumental poverty. Our democracy is very weak in its instruments when we have two parties, two major parties, and that's what the situation requires constitutionally, in which both of which the differences are so much greater than they are in the average between them. That means irresponsible parties. And it's very hard to govern in democracy with irresponsible parties. And the great ambition of my life, the reason I ran so often, was not because I thought I'd be elected or the Socialist Party as such would win. I thought the socialist ideal should win, and I want it to be a catalytic as well as an educational agency in bringing about a new political alignment, a realignment.
In other words, we think we're going away from socialism as you thought of it, even in those days of 1932.
Well, thank God, not being a Republican, I can admit that I can change my mind. I don't have to talk the language of 1920 and do the things in 1954. That's the difference between me and some Republicans. And I, therefore, will gladly admit that I have learned enough to change my mind. But my fundamental convictions have not changed, as I could prove by citing quotations. Even to Senator McCarthy, I could prove it.
Thank you very much, Norman
Thank
Thomas.
God I don't have to.
Great privilege to have you here.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and August Heckscher. Our distinguished guest was Norman Thomas, veteran socialist leader and chairman of the post-war World Council. When next you buy a watch, either for yourself or as an important gift, in all probability your jeweler will show you models of almost every make of watch that you can name at Longines prices and even higher. Now, what's your best buy in this situation? Let's look at the record together. It is very significant that of all the watchmakers of the world, only Longines has won 10 World's Fair Grand Prizes and 28 gold medals. In a word, the highest honors for superiority of manufacture. Now, what about accuracy? In the Grand Championship contest for watchmakers, the accuracy trials at the national observatories, Longines watches have established many records, won countless prizes and honors for exceptional accuracy. And what is the opinion of the scientists? In all fields of precise timing, in sports, aviation, and science, Longines is everywhere the watch of first choice. Now, these facts point to an inescapable conclusion. When next you buy a watch, either for yourself or as an important gift, if you pay $71.50 or more, you're paying the price of a Longines, and you should insist on getting a Longines, the world's most honored watch, the world's most honored gift, premier product of the Longines Whitnall Watch Company since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. We invite you to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening at this same time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, broadcast on behalf of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnall, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. This is Frank Knight, reminding you that Longines and Whitnall watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Whitnall Watches. It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnall Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnall, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening. This is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Mr. William Bradford Huey, editor of the American Mercury, and Colonel Ansel Talbot, an editor of the New York Herald Tribune. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Mr. Tighe Woods, director of the Office of Rent Stabilization. The opinions expressed are necessarily those of the speakers.
Mr. Woods, I'm sure that all of our listeners who are either property owners or who rent property will be delighted to have your views tonight. Now, recently, sir, Senator Dirksen was on this program, and he told our audience something about some proposed changes in the rent control law. Now, what are your views on the so-called Dirksen Amendment, sir?
Well, Mr. Huey, I'm worried about the Dirksen Amendment because Senator Dirksen has said he will introduce it or propose it on the floor of the Senate when this bill comes up for consideration, because it's an amendment that does a lot more than it sounds like. Briefly, it's this. The Dirksen Amendment proposes to decontrol everything except a critical area.
Now, this Dirksen Amendment is something that you expect a Senate fight on it about the second week in June?
That's right, yes.
And the Dirksen Amendment, Senator Dirksen is trying to take off some controls that you don't want taken off.
That's right. If I may explain, under the Defense Production Act as passed by Congress last August, Congress put in a rather rigid, a rather narrow definition of a critical area. Very briefly, a critical area is one in which there has been defense activity or military activity since Korea. There must be an in-migration of labor or military into that area. There has to be a housing shortage, and rents in that area either have risen excessively or are threatening to rise excessively.
Well, now, can you tell our audience, just by way of explanation, what are critical areas under this definition?
Well, you take an area like some of the ones that were hit the papers about a year ago this time, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, Camp Rucker, Alabama. Those are areas where we suddenly had a vast reactivation of military activity with very little housing.
Now, this amendment doesn't recommend the suspension of all controls, does it?
No, but here's what's dangerous about it. Although those critical areas are very important, the major cities of the United States, such as Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco, St. Louis, almost all of your big cities have rent control because they have defense activity and they have a housing shortage. But they couldn't qualify under this very technical definition of a substantial in-migration of labor. So if this amendment should become law, those cities would suddenly find themselves without any rent control.
Now, the Dirksen Amendment, Senator Dirksen proposes to simply end controls except in all areas which are defined as critical. Is that correct?
Which are designated as critical, yes.
And now, you're opposing it for one reason, because of this definition of a critical area.
That's right, because of the one technicality that there has not in these major cities been a substantial in-migration of labor.
How about New York? Has New York got a substantial in-migration of labor?
No, but New York is a little different, Colonel. New York has its own rent control. It's under a state act, but there are some lawyers in Washington today who are constitutional law experts, and this seems to be a time in Washington for a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking on what is constitutional and what isn't, that say that possibly New York could be affected because if cities like Chicago and Philadelphia went out, some people could say that, well, New York doesn't have a substantial in-migration of labor, therefore the New York law is unconstitutional.
Now, as a spokesman for rent control, as the man who is charged with the responsibility for rent control, you're telling our audience that you think it's important that the proposed Dirksen Amendment be defeated.
Very definitely. Now, Mr. Huey, if this was a vote on shall we or shall we not have federal rent control, that would be one thing. My fear in the case of this amendment is that it may not be understood, that normally the confusion over the word critical. To the normal person, under hearing the word critical, they would assume that any city that had rent control because there was a housing shortage would be critical. But because of that very narrow definition, I don't like the wording of the amendment.
Do you think our congressmen understand this subtle distinction, Mr. Wood?
I hope they do. I certainly pray that they do, because I think if they do, then they will make up their minds. Either they feel we should still have rent control as part of the stabilization effort, or we shouldn't have.
Now, sir, moving on to another subject, many of our listeners are, of course, apartment dwellers. Now, what is the general situation in apartment rents today? Are more apartments being built? Is there an easing of the apartment situation across the country?
No, there isn't. Although we've had a tremendous amount of building in the last 4 years, or the last almost 5 years now, most of it has been in homes for sale. I don't think in any one of those years did we exceed 15% of our residential construction for apartments for rent.
Well, now, why have the builders stayed away, preferred to build homes rather than apartments?
Well, when a builder builds a house for sale, he builds the house, the purchaser gets a mortgage, the builder gets his money, and he's out. Then he can start on another one. Whereas in the construction of apartments, well, there are not so many buyers for big apartment builders, so those builders usually have to, their capital is tied up maybe for many, many years. So there haven't been as many apartments constructed, definitely as many as we need.
If an apartment dweller feels he's not getting the right deal on rent, just what does he do about it, Mr. Woods?
Well, he has, if it's under federal rent control, as every city is except Washington and New York, he should go to his local rent office. There are certain rules and regulations. For example, he's supposed to only pay the legal ceiling rent. He's entitled to the essential services that go with that rent. If he's not getting the services, or if he's asked for more rent, he should go to his local rent office and complain. That's what it's there for.
How in general, so you've been in this business of controlling rents now for 10 years, I believe. What is your general appraisal of the program? Has it saved people a great deal of money? Has it been fair?
Yes, it's been fair. We've made mistakes. As time has gone on, we've progressed. I would say that the rent control of today is a lot different than the rent control of 1945, 1946. We've made mistakes, and I won't say that every landlord hasn't had some hardship at one time or another, in that he hasn't always gotten a good deal from the rent office. But the people who work for us are human. They make mistakes. The only thing we can do is when we find them, we try to correct them.
Now, coming back to this apartment business, you say that one of the real needs in this country is more apartment construction. Is
very definitely, Bill, and particularly in the middle income brackets. Now, we've had plenty of apartment construction in New York or Chicago in the high brackets. Today, in the city that I know best, because I grew up there and I was in the real estate business there, Chicago, well, if you can pay $200 a month rent, you can have a choice. But if you're one of those people who has to worry about a ceiling on what he can pay for rent of around $60 or $70, you have a tough job. That's the field that we haven't touched.
Do you think that rent control is going to be with us for some time?
I think, Colonel, I think it will be with us as long as this present mobilization effort is being carried on. Rent control today is tied up very definitely with the stabilization effort, and as long as we're in a mobilization program, we'll have rent control. Now, if you want to pin me down on a date on that, I'd say, well, others in that program have said it's got to go on till about the middle of 1954. I'd say rent control will go on at least that long.
Do you think that housing construction will catch up with the country by that time?
I don't know. I hope. Because rent control isn't going to build any housing, and I'm the first to admit it. It's only a stopgap until we do get some housing.
Now, Mr. Woods, you are what our audience knows as a bureaucrat, are you not, sir?
That's right.
Well, now, can you tell us the size of your particular bureau? How many people do you employ in the rent control?
We have about 2,800 people throughout the country.
And how many dollars does it cost the taxpayers to operate your bureau?
Around $13 million a year.
And do you think that the taxpayers are getting their money's worth?
Very
$13 million?
Yes, I think they do. I think they have gotten their money's worth. And I don't think that landlords have too much to complain about either, because this may startle you, but I think that the real estate industry today is undergoing the greatest boom in its history.
There are about 8 million rental property owners, aren't there, in the United States?
That's considered a fair figure, yes.
Do you think that there's any incentive now to become a rental property owner in this country?
Very definitely, because I think the returns on residential real estate, because of the terrific demand, the shortage, makes it a very profitable business to be in spite of us bureaucrats.
Well, thank you, Mr. Woods, very much for being with us.
The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Mr. William Bradford Huey and Colonel Ansel Talbot. Our distinguished guest was Mr. Tighe Woods, Director of the Office of Rent Stabilization. These glorious spring days are days of great events in many homes. As your favorite son or daughter prepares for graduation just ahead, or as preparations go forward for an important wedding, or as in many homes, plans are being made for the celebration of an anniversary. Now, to mark these happy events, many thousands are planning the purchase of a fine watch. If you are one of these, why not the world's most honored watch? Longines. The Longines watch offers much more than the little more it costs. For Longines, you should remember, is the only watch in history to win 10 World's Fair grand prizes and 28 gold medal awards, and highest honors for accuracy from the leading government observatories of the world. Yet you may buy and proudly give a Longines watch for as little as $71.50. For beauty, greater accuracy, a long and useful life, Longines watches are universally esteemed. For graduation, a wedding, an anniversary, for father on Father's Day, for any important gift occasion, truly no other name on a watch means so much as Longines, the world's most honored watch, premier product of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. We invite you to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening at this same time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, broadcast on behalf of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Wittnauer, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. This is Frank Knight reminding you that Longines and Wittnauer watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Wittnauer Watches. It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour. A presentation of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Wittnauer, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? They are CBS News correspondents Larry Lasser and Winston Burdett. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Dr. Tingfu Tsiang, Chief Delegate from Nationalist China to the United Nations.
Both houses of Congress have now authorized the President to defend Formosa and its other areas with American forces if we find it necessary. There were differences of opinion, of course, strong ones over just which areas should be defended in the Formosa Straits, but there's never been any difference of opinion regarding the caliber of the man who represents Nationalist China at the United Nations. Dr. Tingfu Tsiang is regarded as one of the world's most able diplomats. Dr. Tsiang, how do you greet this resolution by both houses of Congress giving the President power to defend Formosa and the pescadores and all other points necessary?
I'm glad that this resolution was passed, and passed by such large majorities, both in the Senate and in the House. I'm glad for two reasons. One, now everybody knows where USA stands. Secondly, I have a very particular reason. I'm glad that U.S. action is not made conditional upon any action which the United Nations may or may not take.
Well, Dr. Tsiang, do you feel that this resolution that has been passed by Congress enlarges the United States military commitment in the Far East?
I think that depends largely on future developments. Of course, we all know the resolution does not, you might say, diminish U.S. commitment, because before the passage of the resolution, we understood that your government would help us in defending Formosa and Pescadores. The resolution does say about approaches Formosa or related areas. So you can say there might be a general vague enlargement of U.S. responsibilities and commitments. But factually, what that will amount to will depend largely on developments.
Well, speaking of developments, Dr. Tsiang, would you approve of the United Nations ordering a ceasefire in the Straits of Formosa?
No, I'm opposed to it.
Well, then may I add, how strongly are you opposed to it? Would you be so strongly opposed to it that you would veto it?
That I'm not sure, because I haven't seen the wording of the resolution yet. But in principle, I do not think that the United Nations will perform any service to the cause of peace by taking up a resolution on ceasefire.
Well, sir, there have been reports these past few days, I don't know how true they've been, that the government of Nationalist China would not oppose a reasonable ceasefire. Now, were those reports inaccurate or premature or close to the truth?
If you say ceasefire, a factual ceasefire, well, Ms. Burdett, you probably remember that the recent series of war activities along the coast was factually started by the communists on September 3rd. All what we have to do in recent months has been to defend ourselves and to retaliate. We naturally will try to recover the mainland, but we know that cannot be done by this kind of this type of warfare. And then we do not conceive recovering the mainland in the sense of a military conquest of the mainland by force on Formosa. We do not want to fight against our own countrymen. We will fight. Excuse me, I'd like to finish that point. We do not wish to fight against our countrymen on the mainland. We must fight, be ready to fight with our countrymen on the mainland to free them from their oppressors.
Well, would you say that a ceasefire, if ordered by the UN and accepted by the Communist Chinese, would foreclose any opportunity of you to return to the mainland from Formosa?
That, so far as I know, opinion now differs quite a bit. I wouldn't be able to judge on that point until I see the terms of the resolution.
Well, the resolution will exclude the Formosa and the Pescadores and will only apply, I believe, to the islands which are just off the mainland.
Yes.
In other words, Quemoy and Matsu.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that I wish to be frank. One of the reasons why we're opposed to this ceasefire is the point you just mentioned.
Well, I wish you would elaborate on that. The fact that it does exclude Formosa and the Pescadores?
No, I wouldn't say it excludes. It might make our future plans to recover the mainland, to liberate the mainland, more difficult.
Do you believe, sir, that there is any chance of Red China accepting a ceasefire and accepting a de facto ceasefire line somewhere in the Formosa Strait?
This is all guess.
Yes.
And I must confess, probably one guess is good as another. But I myself feel that after the passage of the resolution by U.S. Congress, factually, I think the Chinese communists would not attempt to invade the Formosa or Pescadores. So I anticipate that there will be a factual ceasefire. In that respect, I have the feeling that your president has already rendered the cause of peace a great service. When you speak of a ceasefire order by the Security Council, that is an entirely different matter. I doubt that the communists would accept such an order.
Because it comes from the United Nations?
Yes, that's one thing. I think they will argue, as they have already argued, on Article 2, Section 7 of the Charter, that this matter is essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of a state.
Well, actually, of course, the question of the ceasefire, as it will be put before the Security Council, would be as a threat to international peace. But I'd like to go further on that, Dr. Tsiang. Would you approve of the United Nations inviting a representative of Communist China to come to New York to debate this subject with you?
No, I'm opposed to it. I think the United Nations, I think any organ of the United Nations should not invite anybody who has already been condemned by the United Nations as an aggressor.
Well, sir, to leave...
How strongly are you opposed to that?
I'm very strongly opposed to it.
To leave Formosa out of the picture a moment, do you believe that there is any chance that the Chinese communists will cease firing in their battle to conquer the coastal islands, Quemoy, Matsu, and all the rest?
I think there is a possibility that they will effectually cease firing.
You believe there is such a possibility?
I think there is that possibility.
Do you think that Red China actually wants to get into the United Nations, Dr. Tsiang, or do they actually want more aggression?
I think they want to get into the United Nations for sake of the prestige that membership in the UN confers on a state. And they figure out that aggression and membership are consistent and harmonious, and they have both.
But Dr. Tsiang, if the United Nations should order a ceasefire in the Formosan Straits and also invite a representative of Communist China to come to New York, would you consider that a step towards recognition?
That depends on future developments. I would not go so far as that. I think, no doubt, that step does confer some additional prestige on the Chinese communists.
Well, is it to be taken then, sir, that the Taipei government has not made up its mind exactly how it will react to any resolution by the United Nations which might invite a representative of Communist China to come to this country?
We will oppose it.
Well, in other words, do you think it will be a substantive or a procedural question? Can you veto it?
That, of course, you know, that point, the particular point was raised in the Security Council once upon a time, and opinions differ. I don't want to be dogmatic. Some years ago, I held that it was a point of substance, but the majority of the members held it was not a substantial question, but a procedural question.
And a procedural question, of course, is not subject to the veto,
right.
But this might also be a subject of debate should the invitation go out to Communist China. Well, can you tell me, Dr. Tsiang, just what is your considered opinion right now regarding the possibility of the enlargement, the spreading of this war in the Formosan Straits? Is it dangerous?
No, I think not. I think not. I'm convinced that the world communism will seek fields for further expansion. But I observe that they usually select soft spots. I think they know that Formosa is not a soft spot. And at least there are other spots much softer than Formosa. So I do not feel alarmed about large-scale activities in the Straits of Formosa.
But Dr. Tsiang, what other areas would you regard as a soft spot?
Well, the countries bordering on the south of China, all that region is dangerous weak, politically and militarily. And of course, in the past, China has already done considerable expansion in that direction and has considerable fruits to show. Past experience as well as the resources of the region would attract.
Do you think if there were a ceasefire in the Formosan Straits, they might be tempted to use aggression someplace else then?
The two are separate. Whether there is ceasefire or not, the intention to extend southwards is a permanent factor.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Tsiang. It's always a great pleasure for you to come here and talk to us.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Winston Burdett. Our distinguished guest was Dr. Tingfu Tsiang, Chief Delegate from Nationalist China to the United Nations. They say everyone notices the watch on your wrist. To be well dressed, every detail must conform, including your watch. Now, Longines makes a watch to suit every need, to fill every taste, and the choice of styles and of models is almost unlimited. For ladies, Longines creates superb examples of the jeweler's art, exquisite in taste and finish, perfect for every occasion. For men, Longines produces watches for every requirement, watches for dress and for sport. Longines automatic watches, the most advanced in the world. Waterproof and shock-resistant watches for rugged service. Longines chronograph watches for sportsmen and scientists. And every Longines watch, whether for a lady or for a gentleman, is made to the unique standards of excellence which have won for Longines 10 World's Fair grand prizes, 28 gold medals, highest honors for accuracy in fields of precise timing. And this statement is true throughout the world. The Longines watch on your wrist is just about the finest watch made anywhere in the world, the watch of highest reputation and prestige. And yet, surprisingly, you may own or proudly give a Longines watch for as little as $71.50. Longines, the world's most honored watch, the world's most honored gift, premier product of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. This is Frank Knight reminding you that Longines and Wittnauer watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Wittnauer Watches. At Longines Wittnauer Jewelers, see Atmos, the perpetual motion clock created by LeCoultre. Atmos runs without winding, without electricity, powered only by variations in the temperature of the atmosphere. Atmos, product of LeCoultre, division of Longines Wittnauer.
It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Wittnauer Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Wittnauer, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines.
Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Larry Lasser and Harlan Cleveland, executive editor of the Reporter magazine. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Dr. V.K. Wellington Koo, nationalist China's ambassador to the United States.
Representing a foreign country in Washington is always difficult, but when your country is embroiled in a hot civil war, it doesn't make it any easier. But nationalist China is represented by one of the world's most experienced diplomats. Dr. Wellington Koo has been his country's foreign minister 6 times. Dr. Koo, you've served your country for 3 decades now, and now you represent them in Washington. Tell me, do you think that the two Chinas can ever exist in peace?
I don't think so. Unless you mean peace excludes, say, a rebellion on the mainland, which will upset the regime in Peiping.
Well, do you think that the situation between the two Chinas, Dr. Koo, could ever be settled without recourse to all-out war?
Well, if you mean all-out war, a general conflict, I said no. It can be settled without a third world war.
Well, Dr. Koo, I think most people in this country and most of our allies seem to feel at this moment that the thing to do is to have a ceasefire in the Formosa Strait. Does your government share that view?
Well, we certainly have not been taking the initiative to stir up hostilities. It's the communists who have been bombing us and bombarding us. And so really the question rests with the communists. If they stop fighting, if they stop attacking, there'll be no hostilities.
Well, suppose, for example, the communists were to agree to some form of Geneva conference, or whatever you call it, peacemaking conference. Would this be a conference that the government of nationalist China could enter and could negotiate with them in?
You know, we think that the Chinese communists
they are the tools and the puppets of international communism directed at Moscow. Therefore, we don't think they are qualified really to sit in a conference and undertake any commitments.
Well, Dr. Koo, do you think that a ceasefire in the Formosan Straits would constitute a step towards international recognition of Communist China by the United Nations and possibly later by the United States?
I suppose that is what is in the minds of those who are trying to promote a ceasefire, particularly some of the Western European countries and also some countries in Asia.
Well, do you feel that the communists are driving at a conference which would exclude nationalist China? In other words, the communists have turned down any conference under UN auspices. They say the United Nations is unacceptable, and they've also refused to sit down in a conference outside the United Nations in which your country, nationalist China, is represented. Well, just what are they driving at then?
I think you are on the right track, Mr. Lesser. They certainly they do not recognize the United Nations authority, and they certainly do not recognize us. They want to play the full part as representing China internationally. That's what they are driving after, I think.
Well, do you think they mean negotiating, or do you think they want war?
Well, it depends. If they could get what they are after by negotiation, they will negotiate. On the other hand, if things come to a point where they have to resort to force to some extent, they will try to use force. But I doubt very much that they are ready, or they want a general war, because they are not prepared yet.
This alternation between negotiation and war seems to be the communist trick all over the world. I wonder, Dr. Koo, you were foreign minister back in some of the early days of the relationship between the Russians, the new Soviet Union at that time, the early 20s, and the Chinese nationalist government. Do you see a basis for a permanent mutuality of interest, a permanent alliance between the Soviet Union and the Chinese on the mainland? Or do you think that there are seeds of disunion between them?
Well, if you mean between the Chinese people and Soviet Russia, I say there is no chance at all. Because the Russian policy has always been well understood. It's one of imperialism, of aggression, aggrandizement. But if you mean that the cooperation between Moscow and Beijing, as it is now, that is between the Russian branch of the international communists and the Chinese communists, I think there's a very good chance they'll continue to work on together.
Well, Dr. Koo, when you were foreign minister of China, before the communists were strong on the mainland, what were the sources? Were there any sources of friction between your country and Russia?
Plenty.
What areas did they come about in?
In Xinjiang, which is known as Chinese Turkestan, Outer Mongolia, northern Manchuria. We, through the past 100 years, and even more than that, we had plenty of troubles with the Russians.
And you think that the seeds of potential trouble still lie up there in the north on the borderlands of China and Soviet Russia?
Undoubtedly, there are questions which are still outstanding. But the Russians and the Chinese communists, they are playing together just now. And the communists do not take nationalism very seriously, because they all believe in international communism, so those questions lie in abeyance.
I wonder if we could come back, Dr. Koo, for a minute to the Formosa Strait. One of the questions that's been most discussed and is most confused, I think, in most of our minds is who really owns Formosa anyway? The communists claim it, your government claims it, and there are some who think that it ought to be a UN trusteeship or whatnot. Well, what's the story on who owns Formosa?
Well, Mr. Cleveland, if you speak of ownership in the ordinary sense of the word, I think there's no question that the Republic of China owns Formosa today.
You don't mean the People's Republic either, do you?
Not at all, certainly not. As I might add, you know, the Charter of the United Nations mentions the Republic of China as one of the permanent members. The Cairo Conference allocated Formosa to the Republic of China, and the agreement of the three powers at Cairo was confirmed at Potsdam, which was in turn again affirmed by the instrument of surrender by Japan.
Well, Dr. Koo, do you think it would be possible, if the Chinese communists cannot be ousted from the mainland, and they seem to be pretty well fixed there, that a political formula could be written for Formosa in which we've made into a Republic of Formosa? Would that be satisfactory to the people on Formosa now?
No, it will not be, because we feel that the Chinese mainland, de jure, belongs to the Republic of China, and we still have a deep faith someday we will go back to the mainland. If necessary, we will fight back to the mainland.
Well, what effect would a ceasefire in the Formosa Straits have on the morale of the people on Formosa? It would apparently foreclose any ambitions that you had to go back to the mainland, would it not?
I think it will have that effect to a great extent. And I think that those who are urging a ceasefire may think of so-called stabilizing situation, but it wouldn't solve any question fundamentally.
So you wouldn't count a ceasefire as among the objectives of your government at this time in the Formosa Strait?
No, I don't think we would accept it, because after all, it's a question really not of a war going on. It's a question of one party pursuing a policy of aggression. In this case, it is the Chinese communists who've been taking the initiative in attacking the territories occupied, possessed, owned by nationalist China.
Well, Dr. Koo, do you think that the Chinese communists will ever be satisfied without Formosa?
Well, that is difficult to say. I think so far, every official statement on the subject has been of such character that makes it very clear that they would not rest until they do have Formosa.
Of course, they also said during the Korean War that they meant to drive the United Nations off the Korean Peninsula, and they didn't succeed, and they did sign a treaty anyway. But what would strategic possession of Formosa mean to the communists, Dr. Koo?
Oh, they are. For one thing, if they could take Formosa, they would remove a thorn in their side, and they would think they remove a great danger to their stability and consolidation on the mainland. And from another point of view, Formosa is such an important link in the chain of defense of the Western Pacific that they would like to have it in order to make a breach in this chain of defense. It will open to the Pacific Ocean, and as you know as well as I do, once Formosa in the hands of the communists, it would not be used by the Chinese communists alone. Soviet Russia will step in also.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Koo. It's always a pleasure to hear your words.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Harlan Cleveland. Our distinguished guest was Dr. V.K. Wellington Koo, Nationalist China's ambassador to the United States. If ever you buy an automatic, that is, a self-winding watch, please bear in mind that an automatic is even more complicated than a hand-wound watch. And for that reason, it will pay you to make sure that the automatic watch you buy bears the name Longines. For Longines makes the world's most advanced automatic watches. Now, here are the facts. This diagram represents the winding rotor of an ordinary automatic. See how it moves only in half a circle. This diagram represents the Longines automatic. Now, every Longines automatic watch contains the 360-degree full swing automatic winding rotor, a development pioneered by Longines engineers. Full swing motion means highest winding efficiency without winding shock. Now, for the Longines motor moves freely in a full circle in every direction, and every movement provides winding action. Now, second, you should know that in order to keep a watch thin, some makers use a small movement and allow the rotors to swing outside in this fashion. In the Longines automatic, the movement is full-sized, yet the entire watch is thin. Now, that's a real achievement, exclusively Longines and protected by patents. More important, however, is the micro-precision of Longines manufacture and the precious hand finishing given to essential parts. This is the basic reason for the unparalleled accuracy of all Longines watches, including Longines automatics. Longines watches for ladies and gentlemen are made in a variety of styles, in stainless steel, gold-filled, and in 14-karat gold cases. So if you pay $71.50 or more for a watch, for your own protection, insist on a Longines, the world's most honored watch, the world's most honored gift, premier product of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company since 1866.
It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines.
Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Larry Lasser from the CBS television news staff, and Louis Banks, associate editor of Time magazine. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable William A. Dawson, United States Representative from Utah.
Now, corruption is an ugly word, but its outbreaks are not confined to either political party in this country. Now, some people blame it on the relatively low salaries paid to our elected and appointed officials. But our guest tonight holds some opposing views. Now, Congressman Dawson, why do you oppose a pay increase for congressmen at this time?
Well, Mr. Lasser, I don't particularly oppose it in the view that congressmen are not entitled to more money, but I feel that as boards of directors, that's exactly what we are. We shouldn't be raising our own salaries when we're asking everyone else in the country to tighten their belt and economize, and us go ahead and raise our salaries. I just think it might start out a chain reaction, and government employees all the way down the line would be asking for an increase.
But, Congressman, isn't it true that one of your colleagues in the House has already packed up and gone home because he said he couldn't afford to support his family in Washington?
Well, of course, there are some who think they can't, and I think they might go home for some other reasons. But I think that any man who can't get along in Washington on $15,000 a year just as well pack up his bag and go home. We don't live the life of Riley down there, I can tell you that. But we do get along nicely. Now, I have a wife and 2 children, and we rent a house paying $250 a month, and we still are able to get along. And I believe the people sent us back here to be as frugal as we possibly could and even live like some of the rest of the people live back home. And I just think it's the wrong thing for us from a psychological standpoint with an unbalanced budget to ask the people in this country to help us balance it and cut down, and then for us to set an example by nearly doubling our salaries. It just isn't right. I was opposed to it before, and I'm opposed to it now.
But incidentally, Congressman Dawson, how are you, a frugal congressman, managing to get anything work done now that the McCarthy hearings are on? Are you doing anything?
Well, of course, maybe people might think we'd ought to have our salaries cut off while the McCarthy hearings are going on because all of us are laying off. But I want to tell you, Larry, that isn't the case. Work is going on in Congress just the same as usual, and a lot of hard work. Well, and it's just a shame that we have to be crowded out of the headlines, you might say, to let the people look at this show that's going on there, because we're all working.
Well, speaking of unnoticed work, not much has been heard about Mr. Benson's flexible farm price support program, and I believe as a friend of Mr. Benson's, you've been his great defender. Now, what I wondered, if you think when this does come out, when the program is ready, and Congress that comes before Congress if the Republicans will cut their political throats with a program of flexible price supports.
Well, Mr. Banks, I don't think that's true. I don't think that anyone's going to cut their political throat by defending Secretary Benson. And I'll tell you why. I think that the American people are just too smart and know too much about what's going on in this world to be fooled by this high, rigid price support program.
Well, this is a brave position, though, in a way, because as I understand it, if Congress took no action, the law would just revert to the Act of 1949, which is a flexible support act anyway, and then you wouldn't be taking this risk. Why do you do it?
You'd be back in the old Anderson program then, wouldn't you?
Well, that's right, and that's exactly what would happen. But you say taking a risk. I don't think we are taking a risk, because I'm convinced that once the American people know the truth and know what's right, I think that they'll go along. And that's the reason I say that some of the politicians are going to find themselves fooled, because I believe that even the farmers themselves are way ahead of them on this thing. Now, you can't tell me that the American people are going for any program which costs us $500,000 a day alone in storage charges. In other words, that's what we're paying to store some of these surplus commodities today, $500,000 a day. And the thing that's happened on dairy commodities, for instance, is that we priced the dairy commodities right off of the market. You had butter up around 80 cents a pound with high, rigid government supports. As a result, the housewife just can't buy butter.
Well, when you talk about the American people, of course, we usually divide up the population of the United States politically, and we're speaking about the farm vote now. Well, the farmers go along with with this cut in parity of butter, for instance.
I think the average farmer will. Now, you've heard it said that this farm program, the rigid farm support program, is designed to help the average little farmer. But the fact of the matter is that it's been helping the big farmer and not the little farmer. There are only 23% of all the farmers in this country who get any form of supports, and that's for just a few chosen commodities. And of that 23%, approximately, I have some figures here that might interest you. Of the 23% who get supports, 80% of the money the government uses to purchase or loan on crops is received by 2 million large farmers. The 3 million small farmers share in only about 15% of the annual expenditures by the government. Now, here's something that's interesting,
well, actually, psychologists tell us, Congressman Dawson, that the way to break a habit is to use a substitute, and that goes for making money, too. Now, is Secretary Benson going to offer the farmers any substitute for this price support for dairy products?
Oh, yes. His substitute is that he's going to encourage them to get better marketing methods, to develop new uses for farm products, and to enlarge their markets. That's the principal thing. Now, just today, I received from the Department of Agriculture a can of condensed tomato juice in dry farm powder. And that was mixed with water, and it turned out much better than the regular canned tomato juice. Now, you see, out in my country, where we raise a lot of tomatoes, we're required to pay a high freight rate to get that liquid tomato juice onto the market. Now, by dehydrating it, we can turn out a better product and get it onto the market cheaper. Now, that is what they're attempting to do. This same department developed the frozen orange juice, and you can see what it's done to the orange industry. Now, that's what's needed. The thing that's happening is that they got products up so high that they're priced right out of the market. People can't afford to buy them. And I know even in my own family, we've started using margarine because it tastes just about as good, and many people won't want to go back to butter.
Well, Congressman Dawson, I think it's very courageous for you to support Secretary Benson's program to cut parity on farm prices. But will the rest of the Republican Party go along with Eisenhower's appointees program?
Well, of course, that's a question. Many of the Republicans in the Midwest and in the dairy section up around Wisconsin and Minnesota are fearful of the results, and they're wavering. And even the Agricultural Committee in the House, I think, is going to report out a rigid price support bill, which is contrary to the administration's wishes. But I feel that when it gets onto the floor of the House, you will find a lot of Eastern congressmen and Western congressmen and others who are not going to be swayed by this so-called political angle, who are going to give the administration a lot of support.
When you come right down to it, about 85% of all the congressmen come from urban areas anyway, don't they?
Well, I haven't the exact percentage, but a good many of them in the House. Of course, when you get into the Senate, it's a different proposition because each state has 2 senators.
Well, Congressman Dawson, your state, Utah, is also a rich mineral state. Now that the administration has started this new stockpiling of minerals, is that doing your miners any good?
Well, yes, that's helping, Mr. LeSueur. The lead-zinc industry, particularly out in the West, is in a bad way due to the importation of cheap foreign metals. They've practically been put out of business. And so this stockpiling program is going to be some help. But the difficulty is that when the nation takes on additional metals in the stockpile, that increases the price of the metals. And the foreigners can come in here and bring their metals in and take advantage of our high market. And so it means just as much to them as it does to us, and eventually the market is again flooded, and we're right back to where we began before.
Hey,
So
Congressman Dawson, when you were reelected last year, you said that your fight was going to be to keep the Republican Party liberal. So as a final question, I'd like to ask you, how is your fight going?
Well, I think we're making some headway. I believe the Eisenhower administration has formulated a very liberal program. Some people say, well, you haven't gone far enough, you haven't accomplished enough. But you'd be surprised what we have done down there. Now, I wish we had time to go through some of these liberal policies that have been adopted, but I think we're making some headway. And might I say this, that when I say liberal, I don't mean socialistic. I think the liberal policies that we are adopting are along what you might call conservative lines, if you can reconcile those 2 statements. But we are going on a good, sound, solid foundation, and I think if the Eisenhower administration is given some more time and a little bigger majority in Congress, you'll find that there's going to be a program the American people is going to think a lot of.
Well, may I ask, just as we have a few seconds left, do you think that the policies carried out so far is going to win a majority for the Eisenhower administration in 1954 in these coming
in the
congressional
elections this year? Well, that's you're asking me to guess about something there, but my guess is that they will. I think that the American people realize that Ike has got to have a Republican Congress, and he's got to have enough of a majority to really make things click, and they'll come along with him, and we will have a Republican Congress this fall.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Dawson. Nice to have you here tonight.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry LeSueur and Louis Banks. Our distinguished guest was the Honorable William A. Dawson, United States Representative from Utah. A Longines watch makes the most distinguished gift. For a Longines watch is not alone one of the very finest watches made anywhere in all the world, but equally important. It's the watch of highest prestige. Now consider these beautiful Longines watches for ladies. Here are superb examples of the finest jewelry craftsmanship. Diamonds where used are of the best quality. Meticulous hand finishing gives that final touch of perfection. For men, Longines has created a watch for every need and purpose. Shockproof, moisture-resistant watches for rugged service. The most advanced automatic watches. Handsome dress watches for business and formal wear. Each styled with impressive good taste. And every Longines watch, whether for a lady or for a gentleman, is made to the unique Longines standards of excellence, which have won for Longines 10 World's Fair grand prizes, 28 gold medals, highest honors for accuracy in fields of precise timing, and yet you may buy and own or proudly give a Longines watch for as little as $71.50. For mother on Mother's Day, for an anniversary, a wedding, a budding graduate, throughout the world, no other name on a watch means so much as Longines, the world's most honored watch, the world's most honored gift, premier product of the Longines Whitnall Watch Company, since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. We invite you to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening at this same time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, broadcast on behalf of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. This is Frank Knight, reminding you that Longines and Whitnor watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Whitnor Watches.